When HOA drained my natural spring that had flowed on my property for generations, claiming it posed a flood risk, they had no idea they were triggering nature's perfect revenge. Their manicured lawns turned into swamps, and their designers' kitchens flooded with the very water they had tried to suppress. In the chaos, I uncovered a web of corruption deeper than anyone had imagined. "They can't take your water," my wife Sarah shouted, slamming the official HOA notice onto our kitchen table. I picked up the paper with trembling hands, reading the words that would turn our peaceful life upside down. The natural spring that had bubbled on my family's land for over a century was now declared a flood hazard by the Cascade Heights HOA. Victoria Reed, the HOA president, had been eyeing the spring ever since she moved in 6 months earlier. She had called it an eyesore during her first neighborhood walkthrough, sneering, "That muddy puddle brings down property values," without bothering to understand that it provided fresh water for local wildlife and helped keep our part of the neighborhood naturally cool during scorching summers. The notice gave me 30 days to eliminate the water source or face daily fines of $500. My stomach churned. That spring wasn't just water, it was my grandfather's legacy. He had built stone pathways around it, planted willows that now towered 40 feet high, and taught me how to skip rocks across its shimmering surface. When I was 5, I used to play beside that spring every afternoon, but now, just 2 days after receiving the notice, I found myself at an emergency HOA meeting, clutching photos of the spring in every season, and a petition signed by 12 neighbors who cherished it. Victoria sat at the head of the table like a queen on her throne, flanked by her ever-loyal board members. Martha, my next-door neighbor who once regularly borrowed cups of sugar, now sat stiffly beside Victoria, avoiding my gaze. "The spring poses a significant risk to our community's foundations," Victoria announced, holding up a thick report. "This geological survey confirms that potential flooding could cause millions in damages." I stood up, my legs shaking, but my voice firm. "That spring has existed since before these homes were even built. There has never been a single flood." Victoria smiled smoothly. "Times change, water tables shift. We can't risk our children's safety for sentimentality." I scanned the room and asked, "What children?" "The nearest house with kids is 3 blocks away." A murmur rippled through the room. Some neighbors nodded in support, but others exchanged uneasy looks, whispering about mortgage values and rising insurance rates. Then Martha spoke, her voice thin. "I've noticed more mosquitoes lately. Standing water breeds disease." Still, she wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when the truth hit me. This wasn't about flooding. Victoria had an agenda. I remembered overhearing her at the summer barbecue, talking to a developer friend about maximizing land use potential in the area. She wanted my property, value to sink, so her friend could scoop it up for a bargain. "I demand to see this geological survey," I said, my voice rising. "Who conducted it? When did they even visit my property?" Victoria's smile froze. "The report is confidential," she replied. "It's to protect the surveyor from harassment." "That's not how property assessments work," someone called out from the back of the room. Mr. Peterson, a retired lawyer from down the street, spoke up calmly. "The homeowner has a right to review any reports concerning their land." Victoria's face hardened. "We're not here to debate procedure," she snapped. "All in favor of the spring removal?" 7 hands shot up, every one of them, board members or their close friends. The motion passed. As people filed out, I caught up with Martha in the parking lot. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "You used to bring your grandkids to feed the ducks at my spring." She looked around nervously. "Victoria promised to approve my home addition if I supported her," she said quietly. "I need that extra bedroom for when my daughter visits." My heart sank. Victoria was buying votes with favors. I drove home in a daze, wondering how to fight a system so blatantly rigged. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I heard vehicles outside. Peeking through the curtains, I saw 2 trucks parked near my property line. Dark figures moved in the moonlight, carrying equipment toward the spring. I grabbed my phone and flashlight and ran outside in my pajamas. "Hey, this is private property!" I shouted. The men froze. One of them stepped forward. It was Marcus, the HOA maintenance manager. "Just doing some preliminary measurements, authorized by the board," he said. "At 2 a.m., without notifying me?" I challenged. Victoria stepped out from the shadows, clipboard in hand. "The HOA has 24-hour access rights for safety inspections," she said smoothly. "It's in your contract." "This isn't an inspection," I said. "You're planning something." Her smile turned cold. "We're being proactive about resident safety. Go back to bed." I stood my ground until they left, but I knew they'd return. The next morning I called 3 lawyers. 2 declined as soon as they heard HOA dispute, and the third wanted a $5,000 retainer just to review the case. Desperate, I drove to the county records office. After hours of digging, I uncovered something explosive. The geological surveyor Victoria had hired was her own brother-in-law, and his license had been suspended 2 years earlier for falsifying reports. Even more shocking, I discovered that Cascade Heights was built on an ancient watershed system. My spring wasn't just decorative. It was a vital pressure release point for underground water. Blocking it could trigger serious damage across the entire neighborhood. Armed with this new information, I formally requested another HOA meeting. Victoria denied the request, claiming there was no new evidence. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play. I created a simple website that laid out everything. Photos documenting the spring's 100-year history, records from the county office, and proof that the geological report was fake and authored by Victoria's suspended brother-in-law. Then I shared the link on our neighborhood Facebook group. Within hours, comments flooded in. Some residents reminisced about the spring's role in the community. Others questioned why the board had acted so quickly. A few board members even messaged me privately, admitting they felt pressured to vote in favor of its removal. Victoria responded by sending cease and desist letters accusing me of defamation. But truth isn't defamation, so I kept posting. Then something happened that changed everything. Mrs. Henderson, who had lived in Cascade Heights for 60 years, left a comment that lit a fire across the community. That spring saved our neighborhood during the 1978 drought. When the city water failed, we all got our drinking water from it. It's not just pretty, it's essential. Suddenly, people were really listening. They shared their own memories, their suspicions about Victoria's motives, and for the first time, it felt like the tide was turning. But Victoria wasn't done. That night, I got an anonymous phone call. "Drop the website or you'll regret it," the voice warned, distorted and cold. I recognized the threat for what it was. The next morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of heavy machinery. Industrial pumps lined the edge of my property, roaring as they sucked water from the spring. Victoria stood nearby, supervising in designer sunglasses, while Marcus directed workers in orange vests. I ran outside in my pajamas. "Stop! This is illegal," I shouted. Victoria didn't flinch. "Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA bylaws," she said coolly. "We have authority to address immediate safety hazards." She waved a document. "Judge Keller signed this emergency order last night." My spring, our family's spring, was turning into a muddy pit right in front of me. The crystal-clear water, once teeming with life, now vanished into hoses. 100-year-old lily pad shriveled in the sun. A family of ducks wandered, confused, around what used to be their home. I called 911, but the operator said it was a civil issue. Animal control told me they'd need 48 hours to respond. I felt powerless, watching my family's legacy vanish. Sarah came out with her phone, recording. "Every second." "This is criminal," she said, her voice shaking with fury. Marcus stepped forward. "Ma'am, I need you to stop filming. This is private HOA business." She didn't budge. "This is our property," she snapped. I countered, "And that's my spring you're destroying." By noon, the spring was gone. In its place was a crater of cracked mud where water once sparkled and danced in the sun. The willow trees surrounding it already showed signs of stress, leaves curling inward as if in mourning. That afternoon Martha appeared at her fence line, planting new roses. "Sorry about your water feature," she said, not looking up, "but property values should improve now." I stared at her, stunned. "You do realize that spring fed the groundwater for this entire area, right?" She shrugged. "Victoria says the city water system is perfectly adequate." That evening I met with Sam, a hydrologist, an old friend from college. He studied my property maps and historical surveys, his expression growing more concerned by the minute. "This is bad," he muttered. "Really bad. Your spring wasn't just decorative. It was acting as a pressure release valve for the entire aquifer system." "What happens without it?" I asked. "The water has to go somewhere," he replied, "and it'll take the path of least resistance, probably straight into people's basements." I felt a glimmer of hope. If I could prove the spring's importance scientifically, maybe I could force the HOA to reverse their decision. The next week, Sam and I installed monitoring equipment around the neighborhood to track soil moisture and groundwater levels. The data was disturbing, pressure was rising fast. I tried to present our findings at the next HOA meeting, but Victoria had already changed the rules. "Only board members can add agenda items now," she announced with a smug smile. Frustrated, I went public. Local news picked up the story. "Historic spring destroyed by HOA." Reporters interviewed Mrs. Henderson, who tearfully recounted the 1978 drought and how the spring saved the neighborhood. Environmental groups expressed outrage. Victoria fought, back with a PR firm, painting me as a disgruntled homeowner spreading lies. Their media campaign touted modernizing infrastructure and protecting families. The battle escalated. Victoria filed a defamation lawsuit against me, and I countersued for property damage. Legal bills piled up on both sides. Then the first basement flooded. The Johnsons, 6 houses down, woke up to 3 inches of waters in their finished basement. Their insurance called it groundwater intrusion, not covered. 2 days later, the Garcias reported water seeping through their foundation. Then the Parkinsons. Then Martha. I watched from my window as she frantically bailed water from her basement, her prized roses drowning in the oversaturated soil. Part of me felt vindicated, but mostly I felt heartbroken. This didn't have to happen. Emergency HOA meetings became weekly occurrences. Residents demanded answers. Victoria kept deflecting, insisting, "These are isolated incidents." But no one was buying it anymore. She insisted it was old pipes, poor drainage, anything but the spring. But Sam's data told a different story. Without its natural release valve, the aquifer was forcing water up through any available crack. The entire water table was destabilizing. I posted Sam's findings on the neighborhood Facebook group, and the response was instant. "My sump pump hasn't stopped running in days. There's a spring bubbling up in my backyard now. My foundation guy says this could cost $50,000 to fix." Property values began to plummet. 3 houses went up for sale within a week. Local news crews returned, this time with headlines like, "HOA's decision creates neighborhood nightmare." Victoria grew frantic. She tried blaming the city, the aging infrastructure, the weather, even global warming, anything but herself. At one point, she even suggested that I had sabotaged the neighborhood out of spite. But the real bombshell came thanks to Mr. Peterson, the retired lawyer from down the street. "Follow the money," he told me over coffee. And we did. What we found was worse than anyone imagined. Victoria's brother-in-law, the one behind the falsified geological survey, wasn't just moonlighting as an expert. He owned a drainage company, a company that had just been awarded a $2 million contract by the HOA to manage water issues in Cascade Heights. In other words, the same people who drained my spring were now being paid to fix the disaster they caused. I filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general. Investigators showed up within days, subpoenaing financial records interviewing board members, documenting the worsening flood conditions. Victoria tried to resign quietly, but residents demanded a public meeting. We packed the school auditorium. Angry neighbors waved repair bills and insurance denials in the air. When Victoria took the stage, she tried to speak about unforeseen consequences and acting in good faith. The room erupted in boos. Then I played my trump card. Sarah had kept filming the morning they drained the spring. In the background of one video, barely audible over the pumps, Victoria could be heard telling Marcus, "Once property values drop, my developer friends will buy up the whole block. We'll all make millions." The auditorium exploded. People were shouting for her arrest. Several board members resigned on the spot. Martha, tearful, admitted Victoria had promised her zoning favors in exchange for her vote. That night, state officials took Victoria into custody. She was later charged with fraud, conspiracy, and misuse of HOA funds. Her brother-in-law's company went bankrupt. The entire developer scheme collapsed. But our problems weren't over. The neighborhood was still flooding. Insurance companies had declared the damage man-made and denied claims. Many homeowners faced financial ruin. It ultimately took a federal disaster declaration to get help. Government engineers worked for months to restore the neighborhood's natural water flow. My spring was rebuilt carefully with guidance from hydrologists, but the aquifer system would take years to fully recover. The total cost? Over $10 million. Most of it was recovered from Victoria's seized assets and the HOA's liability insurance. Victoria was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Martha now leads a reformed HOA focused on environmental preservation. She tends a small memorial garden beside my spring, teaching neighborhood kids about working with nature, not against it. As for me, I learned something deeper. Sometimes the best revenge isn't confrontation. It's simply letting nature and truth do what they do best. Water always finds its way, and so does justice. The knock at my door startled me awake. I blinked at my phone. 3:27 a.m. Who visits at this hour? Through the peephole, I opened the door to find my neighbor Bill, drenched and panicked. "Water's everywhere," he gasped. My basement was completely flooded, 3 inches deep. I threw on my jacket, but something didn't add up. Bill lived uphill from me. Water shouldn't flow downhill from his house. The next morning, I spent hours digging through dusty folders at the county records office. My fingers blackened with dirt. I requested old maps. The clerk raised an eyebrow, but I needed answers. That's when I found it, a 1952 geological survey showing that Cascade Heights sat atop a network of underground water channels. The spring in my yard wasn't ornamental. It was part of a system designed to regulate water pressure for the entire neighborhood. By sealing it off, Victoria had turned the community into a pressure cooker. At home, I called Sam, a hydrologist friend from college. After reviewing the documents, he confirmed my fears. That spring worked like a relief valve. You block it, and the water forces its way out, usually through foundations. You're sitting on a water bomb. I needed proof. Borrowing ground penetrating. Radar, I tracked the water beneath our streets. The data was terrifying. Pressure had doubled in 2 weeks. At this rate, half the neighborhood would be underwater by spring. The next HOA meeting was packed. Residents complained of damp basements and cracked foundations. Victoria, poised at the head table in her designer suit, waved it off. "Isolated incidents," she said smoothly. "Our drainage expert assures us—" "Your expert never even visited the site," I interrupted, holding up the geological survey. "This proves the spring was essential to our water system." Martha stood, outraged. "Victoria increased our property values by 20%. Why should we trust you over our successful board president?" Murmurs of agreement followed. I saw then Victoria had bought their loyalty with rising property values and empty promises. Ask yourselves why she rushed this project, I challenged. Why hire consultants who never inspect the property? Why ignore decades of natural balance? Victoria's smile froze. Motion to adjourn, she said sharply. Wait, Bill interrupted. My insurance adjuster says the flooding is from disrupted groundwater. They won't cover it. The room erupted into chaos. Victoria slammed her gavel, but the crowd wouldn't quiet. Outside, Sam pulled me aside. There's more, he said in a low voice. I traced the drainage contractor. It's owned by Victoria's brother-in-law. She's getting kickbacks. Can you prove it? Working on it. But be careful. She has powerful friends. That night, I installed security cameras around my house. If Victoria was corrupt, she might do anything to silence me. Sure enough, around midnight, my camera caught someone tampering with my water meter. The figure wore a hood, but I recognized him. Marcus, the HOA's maintenance manager. He was trying to frame me for the flooding. I backed up the video footage to 3 separate drives. This was bigger than I'd imagined. The following week, more basements flooded. The community pool cracked under mounting underground pressure. Even Victoria's closest allies began questioning her leadership. Night after night, I pored over water rights law, discovering that the HOA had violated multiple state regulations. They needed permits for major drainage changes, permits they never obtained. At the local library, I uncovered newspaper clippings about Victoria's previous HOA tenure. She'd resigned suddenly following financial irregularities. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. I just needed proof. Then, one rainy evening, Martha showed up at my door, mascara streaked down her cheeks. My roses are dying, she sobbed. The whole yard is waterlogged. Victoria promised this would never happen. Did she promise you anything else? I asked gently. Martha hesitated, then nodded. A board position, extra votes on landscaping decisions. She looked away, ashamed. But now, she gestured helplessly toward her flooded garden. I showed her my research. Her eyes widened as she flipped through each document. She's been playing us all, Martha whispered. Then she straightened. Will you help me expose this? Yes, I said. I have emails, she added. Victoria had offered special treatment in exchange for loyalty. Together, we built our case. More neighbors came forward, stories of bribes, coercion, even threats. Victoria had woven a web of corruption, all for personal gain. I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Environmental Protection. Soon investigators arrived to collect water samples and interview residents. Victoria scrambled for control, hosting wine and cheese events filled with spin and half-truths. But the crowds dwindled with each gathering. Late one night, Martha handed me financial records she'd smuggled from board meetings. That's when I found the smoking gun, payments from HOA accounts to the drainage company perfectly matched. Deposits into Victoria's personal bank account. We had her. But Victoria wasn't done fighting. The next morning, I found a cease and desist letter in my mailbox accusing me of defamation and threatening legal action. She was declaring war. I was ready. During the emergency HOA meeting, as Victoria stood confidently denying any link between the block spring and the flooding, water exploded through her kitchen floor. She froze mid-sentence as her expensive tile buckled, then shattered. A jet of water sprayed toward the ceiling. "Everyone out!" I shouted. Board members scrambled, shoes soaked, chaos erupting around us. Victoria stood still, staring at her cracked granite countertops. "This is impossible," she kept muttering, but I knew better. The underground aquifer had finally broken, right beneath the woman who had triggered the disaster. Outside, residents gathered in stunned clusters. Martha clutched her rescued meeting notes, now water-stained, but still damning. News vans arrived within minutes. Someone had tipped off Channel 7. "Is it true the HOA president's house just flooded?" a reporter asked, thrusting a mic. Toward me, before I could answer, Victoria stormed out, hair wild, eyes blazing. She pointed at me. "This is sabotage. He did this." The camera swung between us. I stayed calm. "I've been warning about this for weeks. Nature doesn't follow HOA rules." That's when Harold, our long silent treasurer, stepped forward. His hands trembled as he raised a thick folder. "I can't stay silent anymore," he said, voice shaking. "These are the real financial records." The crowd went still. Victoria lunged for the documents, but Harold held firm. Camera flashes exploded around them like lightning. "Show us page 7, I urged, remembering the suspicious payments I'd uncovered. Harold flipped to it. The truth was there in black and white, payments made to VR Consulting, a shell company owned by Victoria. Every drainage project expense matched perfectly with deposits into her personal accounts. "This is a setup," Victoria shrieked, but the water still poured from her house, an unstoppable metaphor for the collapse of her empire. By afternoon, state investigators arrived, finally spurred into action by the public flooding. They fanned out across the neighborhood, taking soil samples, measuring groundwater levels, inspecting illegal drainage modifications. I guided them to key sites, pointing out where environmental codes had been violated. Martha became our star witness. "She promised me special treatment," she told the agents. "Said my property value would double if I supported the spring removal." More neighbors stepped forward. Victoria had offered them all something: reduced HOA fees, committee positions, faster approvals. She'd bought silence and loyalty with favors. Meanwhile, insurance companies sent their own investigators. With the HOA's documented negligence, they denied all claims. Residents were left with flooded homes and mounting bills. "We trusted her," Bill said, staring at his ruined basement. "Now we're losing everything." I organized a community meeting at the local school gym, neutral ground. The place was packed. "We can fix this," I told them, presenting a plan for restoring the spring system and preventing future flooding. "But first, we must remove corrupt leadership and recover the funds stolen from us." That night, surveillance cameras caught Victoria loading boxes into her car. I alerted the sheriff. They intercepted her at the county line. Inside her vehicle, HOA laptops, shredded documents, and a suitcase packed for escape. Her arrest made headlines: "HOA president caught fleeing after flood scandal." The mugshot said it all, her designer jacket splattered with mud, her expression wild, a far cry from the polished image she once projected. Under interrogation, she finally cracked. The full extent of her scheme came to light. Years of embezzlement across multiple HOAs, hidden behind charm and empty promises. She had a pattern, targeting communities with valuable natural features, gutting them for personal profit. Victoria's trial moved swiftly. I testified about the geological surveys I uncovered, the illegal drainage modifications, and the tampered water meter. Martha detailed the bribery attempts. Harold laid out the financial fraud with surgical precision. Victoria's defense tried to spin her actions as efforts to improve the community, but the prosecution, led by Sarah Chin, dismantled every excuse. The final blow came from security footage, Victoria counting stacks of cash with her contractors, guilty on all counts, the judge declared. Victoria was sentenced to 15 years in prison for fraud, environmental violations, and conspiracy. Her assets were seized and redirected toward neighborhood restoration, but justice, though satisfying, didn't undo the damage. Engineers worked around the clock to design systems that could gradually restore the natural water flow. Reopening the spring required precision. It had to be done slowly, carefully, to prevent further structural damage. Insurance battles raged on. Some residents, financially ruined, sold their homes at deep losses. Others banded together to file a class action lawsuit against Victoria and her associates. Through it all, I kept documenting. My research was requested by local universities as a case study in environmental justice. The story exploded online. David versus HOA Goliath, striking a nerve nationwide. Martha surprised everyone by stepping forward to lead the interim HOA board. "I helped create this mess," she said. Simply, "Now I want to help fix it." Together, we rewrote the bylaws. Environmental impact studies became mandatory for all projects. Financial transparency was non-negotiable. No more backroom deals, no more rushed decisions. Contractors worked through the winter, installing proper drainage and preparing the ground for the spring's controlled reopening. The aquifer, long disturbed, needed time to heal. By the time spring arrived, hope had begun to bloom again in Cascade Heights. Yards dried. Foundations were repaired and trust cautiously began to return. The day the spring flowed again, children gathered around it, eyes wide in wonder. Their laughter echoed through the neighborhood. It reminded me why this fight had mattered, not just to expose corruption, but to preserve something irreplaceable. For the next generation, Victoria's empire had collapsed like her waterlogged mansion. But from the wreckage, our community rose, stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. Even the courthouse wasn't immune to what we'd unleashed. As I took my seat on the witness stand, water dripped steadily from a stained ceiling tile. Victoria sat slouched at the defendant's table, her designer suit wrinkled, hair a tangled mess, a ghost of the polished, iron-fisted president who once ruled Cascade Heights. "The state calls its next witness," the prosecutor announced. Martha shuffled forward, clutching water-stained documents. "Mrs. Henderson," said the prosecutor, "please tell the court what happened to your home after the spring was drained." "The prosecution may proceed," the judge said. Martha stepped up to the stand, hands trembling. 3 feet of water in my basement," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My wedding photos, my children's baby albums, all destroyed. The mold spread so fast." She choked back tears. "Objection!" Victoria's lawyer snapped. "Emotional manipulation." The judge didn't flinch. "Your client manipulated an entire neighborhood. Overruled. Continue, Mrs. Henderson." Martha wiped her eyes and pressed on. She described how Victoria had promised her a position on the board in exchange for support. "She told me our property values would skyrocket if we got rid of that spring. I believed her." The prosecutor turned to the screen behind her. A set of bank records appeared. "These documents show monthly payments from Cascade Drainage Solutions to an offshore account, under Ms. Reed's name. Can you explain this, Ms. Reed?" Victoria remained silent, but the color drained from her face. During the break, I overheard 2 jurors whispering. "Can you believe she thought she'd get away with this?" one said. The afternoon brought more bombshells. The state's geological expert testified that Victoria had ignored 3 separate warnings about aquifer pressure. She was explicitly told that removing the spring could destabilize the entire water table, he said. Her response was, and I quote, "I don't pay you for opinions." Then came the testimony from Victoria's brother-in-law, owner of Cascade Drainage Solutions. He had taken a plea deal. "She approached me with the scheme," he admitted. "Said we'd split the profits, 60-40. The HOA would pay inflated prices, and I'd kick back the difference." Gasps rippled through the courtroom when surveillance footage played. Victoria accepting a briefcase full of cash in a dimly lit parking garage. Under pressure, her composure cracked. "You're all jealous," she shouted during cross-examination. "I made Cascade Heights prestigious. That spring was ruining property values. I did what had to be done by destroying people's homes." I couldn't help saying from the gallery. The judge banged the gavel. "Order!" Victoria spun toward me, furious. "This is all your fault. If you just complied with HOA rules you created to line your pockets." The prosecutor cut in. The next witness, a forensic accountant, dealt the final blow. "Victoria Reed embezzled over $800,000, he testified, presenting charts and financial statements. She disguised the payments as emergency maintenance and flood mitigation. The jury gasped. Victoria sat motionless, lips pressed into a thin line. When court adjourned, reporters swarmed the steps outside. "How does it feel to see justice served?" one asked me. "This isn't about revenge," I said carefully. "It's about accountability. Our community trusted her, and she betrayed that trust." That night, another basement flooded. Emergency crews worked late into the evening. The news ran footage of destroyed homes under the headline, HOA president's greed creates environmental disaster. My phone buzzed with messages. Some thanked me. Others blamed me. The community was divided, but at least the truth was finally out. The next day, Victoria's defense collapsed completely. Prosecutors revealed internal emails between her and her brother-in-law. Target the water feature. First, she wrote, create a problem, then offer our solution. The jury took just 3 hours to deliberate. Guilty on all counts, the foreman announced. Victoria slumped in her chair as the judge began his sentencing. Ms. Reed, you abused your position of trust for personal gain, causing immeasurable harm to this community, he said. I hereby sentence you to 15 years in federal prison and full restitution to your victims. As the bailiffs led Victoria away, she turned and spat. I hope you're happy. I'm not happy, I replied truthfully, but I'm relieved the truth finally came out. Outside, news vans lined the streets. Cascade Heights faced a long and painful recovery. Insurance companies had denied most claims, citing the disaster's man-made origin. Many families faced financial ruin. Marcus, the former maintenance manager who had once helped drain my spring, approached hesitantly. I'm sorry, he said. Victoria threatened to fire me if I didn't help. My kid needs medical care. I couldn't lose our insurance. I understood, even if I couldn't fully forgive. What matters now is helping our community heal, I told him. That night, I stood at my kitchen window, watching emergency pumps work overtime in neighbors' yards. The spring's absence had created a chain reaction none of us could have predicted. Property values had dropped 40% overnight. Several families had already moved out, unable to afford repairs. My phone rang. It was Sam, my hydrologist friend. I've been analyzing the water table data, he said urgently. We need to restore that spring soon. How soon? I asked. Within 6 months, or the aquifer could collapse. And if it does, the damage won't stop at Cascade Heights. It'll impact 3 neighboring communities. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders. Victoria's greed had caused this, but now it was up to us to fix it. Rain tapped against the window pane. Water pooled in the once pristine yards. Nature was reclaiming what we had tried to control, and the price was far greater than we'd imagined. 6 months later, I stood knee-deep in mud, directing the restoration crew. Careful. With that pipe, I called as workers maneuvered heavy equipment around the spring site. The morning buzzed with activity. Excavators, engineers, and volunteers all working together to undo Victoria's damage. Martha approached in rubber boots, holding 2 cups of coffee. I never thought I'd say this, she said, handing me one, but I miss your spring. Her transformation from Victoria's loyal supporter to environmental advocate had surprised everyone, most of all herself. Sam appeared, peering at readings on his tablet. The aquifer's pressure is stabilizing, he reported, but we're not out of danger yet. The restoration wasn't just about reviving a water feature, it was about saving our neighborhood. Federal disaster funds and Victoria's seized assets barely covered the costs. Every resident pitched in, from the elderly couple making sandwiches for workers to the teens clearing debris after school. 3 weeks in, disaster struck. A utility line, illegally installed under Victoria's watch, ruptured and flooded the site. Contaminated soil and broken equipment forced us to halt everything. This is exactly what Victoria wanted, one neighbor grumbled during an emergency meeting. Even from prison, she's causing problems. No, I said firmly. This is what happens when someone cuts corners. We're doing this the right way, even if it takes longer. Then, something extraordinary happened. While excavating, we uncovered an ancient water management system, stone channels buried beneath decades of development. Dr. Sarah Clearwater, our indigenous consultant, examined the structure with awe. This wasn't just a spring, she explained to the gathered crowd. It was part of a sophisticated system built by the native peoples of this land to balance water flow and sustain life. Her words transformed our project. Instead of simply restoring the spring, we blended traditional wisdom with modern engineering. What began as a local restoration evolved into a model for sustainable development. Environmental groups took notice. Local schools brought students to learn about water ecology and conservation. Martha started a community garden using responsible irrigation methods. Even former skeptics began to understand the connection between natural systems and neighborhood health, and then, finally, the day came. We reopened the spring. Hundreds gathered as the first clear water bubbled to the surface. Children laughed and splashed in the shallow pools. Adults wiped away tears. The sound of flowing water, absent for so long, felt like music. I stepped forward to address the crowd. "I want to thank everyone who believed in this project," I said, "especially those who once opposed it, but chose to listen, to learn, and to change." Martha, standing proudly beside me as the newly elected HOA president, added, "We've all made mistakes, but today we proved that we can come together, not just to rebuild, but to do better." As the spring sparkled under the sun, our neighborhood, once divided by deception, found something deeper than water flowing through it again: hope. I'm proud to announce that we've officially revised our bylaws. From now on, all environmental decisions require both community input and expert consultation. But the transformation didn't stop at water management. Property values began to recover as our story attracted buyers who cared about sustainability. Cascade Heights was no longer defined by HOA scandals. It became a model for innovative suburban ecology. 6 months after restoring the spring, we hosted our first annual Spring Festival. Local artists painted murals illustrating the aquifer system. Restaurants served dishes featuring herbs grown in Martha's thriving community garden. Children splashed in designated areas of the spring, their laughter echoing through the neighborhood. Victoria's former mansion, seized by authorities, was repurposed as the Cascade Heights Environmental Education Center. Inside, displays told the story of our crisis and the hard-earned lessons that followed. One prominent exhibit featured copies of the corrupt emails and falsified geological reports, proof of what unchecked power can do. I often gave tours at the center, sharing our journey with visitors. "The spring taught us that everything's connected," I'd explain. "When we try to control nature without understanding it, we create problems we can't foresee." Not everything had a happy ending. Some families never came back, unable to forgive the breach of trust. Others continued to face mounting repair bills. But we learned to work together, to question authority when needed, and to respect the natural systems that sustained us. A year after restoration, the spring received official environmental protection status. No future HOA could touch it without a full environmental review. We created legal safeguards to ensure there would never be another Victoria. The most satisfying moment came during a surprise inspection. After reviewing our data, the lead official said, "Your community's response to this crisis is remarkable. You've turned a disaster into a blueprint for environmental stewardship." Martha and I often sat by the spring in the evenings, watching fireflies dance above the water. "Remember when I called this your gaudy water feature?" She'd laugh. "I was such a fool." "We all were," I'd reply. "We let someone convince us that nature was the enemy." But the spring had become more than just a water source. It was a symbol of resilience and redemption. Families picnicked by its banks. Wedding photographers came to capture its beauty. New residents learned its story and pledged to protect it. As I write this, children are in the educational garden learning to identify native plants. Solar panels power our community center. Rain barrels collect water for irrigation. We became the change we needed. Victoria served her prison sentence and vanished from public view. Last I heard, She was living quietly in another state. Sometimes I wonder if she ever truly grasped the scope of what she'd done, not just the environmental damage, but the betrayal of a community's trust. The spring flows clear and strong now, its gentle murmur a constant reminder of nature's persistence and quiet strength. What began with one person's greed turned into a collective awakening. Sometimes the worst disasters bring the most profound transformations. As new families move in, drawn by our story, I realize Victoria inadvertently gave us a gift. She showed us what happens when power eclipses responsibility, when profit trumps stewardship, when we ignore the warnings nature tries to give. Now, with every bubbling surge, the spring whispers the same message: respect, balance, and vigilance. The very thing Victoria tried to destroy has become the heart of our reborn community, a living testament to what can happen when people choose. Understanding over dominance, cooperation over control, and harmony over profit.